Hi there, welcome to the show. This will be episode number 5, where I talk to you about anxiety and medicine. On one of my prior episodes, I talked to you about my journey with weight going up and down and fluctuating and yo-yo dieting. I have experienced that for many years, but one other thing that I've experienced for many years is anxiety and panic attack. Both. They're not the same thing. They're sort of two sides of the same coin, but I've lived with this for a real long time. At the end of today's episode, I will give you a list of things that I've used that have helped me in my journey living with this for a little bit over 37 years now. There are things that I've had to learn. There are things that I've had to adjust in the way that I live, I eat, and I am. Anxiety attacks and panic attacks have similar traits but different symptoms. And should you have any of these, I'm going to ask you right now to contact your healthcare provider and make sure that you address this as soon as possible and don't let it go untreated, because for a lot of us it gets only worse. If you don't suffer from anxiety or panic attacks and know someone who does, I would highly recommend that you forward this video over to them or talk to somebody that's close to them that might be able to approach them in regards to this. Also, please, if you're enjoying some of the material that I'm putting out, please give me a subscribe and a like. It's the only way that I know to keep going, so I really appreciate any support I can get in that realm. One disclaimer is that I'm not a doctor, psychiatrist, or psychologist, so anything that I'm sharing with you comes from my personal experience and is not from a trained professional. So here we go. Episode number 5 on the Jerry Pujols Project 2.0. I'm going to start this journey when I found myself about to become homeless in New York City, homeless for the second time when I was about 18 years old. As some of you know, I moved to New York City when I was 17 years old. I had recently met a young woman in a nightclub in Miami, and 2 weeks later I found myself living at her apartment in Manhattan. The idea of living in New York City with a 22, 23-year-old woman seemed exciting to me at the time, and it allowed me the space and the reason to get out of Miami. However, if my memory serves me right, I had about $400 in my pocket, and for some reason I assumed that she'd have my back when I ran out of money, but this couldn't be any further from the truth. She was an independent person and did not want to take care of somebody, and I can't blame her. At the time, I found myself scrambling to find a job. I started knocking on every single door, anybody that would give me the time of day. I started just basically prospecting for business. The business that, or the work or the trade that I knew was construction. And back in the 80s in New York City, the mafia had that market cornered and they were not going to hire some kid off the street. So I literally just continued to knock on doors and try to see who'd give me the time of day. I found myself, and I don't even remember how, I found myself in the South Bronx at a donut shop, and I asked the owner, a Korean gentleman, I asked him if he was hiring. He said, no, I can't afford to hire anybody. He was working behind the counter. And at that point, I was so desperate, I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I basically told him that I would work for below minimum wage. I think minimum wage was $4 an hour at that point. I told him I'd work for $2 as long as I can work 80 hours a week. And he agreed to that. So I figured in my head, since I was already out of money, I figured I can at least get 3 meals while working that many hours, and then I'd have enough money to be able to contribute to rent and not get thrown out on the street because my girlfriend wasn't about to support me. I remember for weeks I worked my fingers to the bone, day in, day night, and all of a sudden I kept looking at the paper and there was an ad for a doorman at a club in Manhattan. I didn't know till I went to the interview that this club in Manhattan was what we used to call back in the day a gentleman's club. So I go over there, I walk downstairs into what was an underground strip club to be met by a gentleman that reminded me of like a Robert De Niro look-alike, wearing like a real nice Armani suit. And months later, he told me the reason he hired me on the spot was because I didn't look at the girls. So because I didn't look at the girls, I got the job. And I think I probably had enough street smarts to know that if you're going to go somewhere to be a bouncer and you're going to look at the girls, they're probably not going to look kindly upon that. So I didn't do that. I got the job. Wonderful. That job paid $100 a day, and it allowed me to at least contribute with my girlfriend at the apartment I was living with. So not too much time passed. I decided that visiting some of the girls that worked at the club was a good idea. That led me to literally being thrown out on the street. Well deserved. My girlfriend literally threw my 2 or 3 suitcases that I had right on Broadway, in the middle of Broadway, on the snow, right across. This little club was right across from where they played Les Miserables. So luckily for me, another one of the guys that worked in the club allowed me to crash at his place, and it so happens that this person was the person that got me to Napa. It was his uncle and his niece, who happened to be a dancer at the club, were both from Napa. They let me crash at their place in Queens, and I started commuting from Queens to Manhattan to come to work. So one of our jobs in this club was to make sure that pimps were not soliciting the girls. So there were times that we had to get physical, throw these guys out on the street, or if we didn't have to throw them out on the street, sometimes things would get volatile and we would say things that were off color and off-putting. And for me, it felt stressful because I knew that I had to go home at some point. And the stress of having to go home always made me feel like I had to look over my shoulders constantly to make sure somebody wasn't going to do something to hurt us. Going home was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and that's perfect time for somebody to jump you. So I'm sharing with you some of these stories so you can see how traumatic events or things that you live with start to add up. I grew up in a pretty volatile household where there was a lot of fighting, verbally and physically. And with all that being said, I feel like the glass was continuously filling for me, but I didn't know what was yet to come. I did a lot while I was in New York City. I did some off-Broadway acting. I just constantly scrambling to become successful at something. At 18, by now I was probably closer to 19 years old, and things were moving fast enough, but I still felt the overwhelming amount of stress and trying to survive in that city sort of overwhelmed me. And I remember one time I was close to the apartment building where I left, and I remember looking up at the sky, and everything started to spin, everything started to move in circles. And I felt this sense of dread, and I literally ran right up to a bench and just sat down because I thought I was gonna just literally like the life was gonna leave me, like I was literally just gonna die. And this happened that one time, and it didn't happen again, and it just kind of blew me away. I can't remember this far back if I went to the doctor or what it was, but at this point I knew I wanted to go back home. I knew I wanted to go back to Miami. I'd already tried my hand at New York, and I thought it was time to go back to where family was, where I felt safe. I called one of my uncles in Miami to ask him for money, and I remember my uncle telling me he couldn't do it. I don't know if he didn't have the money at the time, or how a plane ticket was a challenging thing for him at the time, but I was so devastated by that if I knew one thing for sure was I was never going to ask anybody for money again. So that was kind of a driving force for me. But Luckily for me, my roommate lent me the money to get a plane ticket and come over to Napa because he suggested I check out Napa. It wasn't long thereafter I met Susan, got married. We had 2 automatic kids because Susan had 2 tiny kids, and I was excited at the idea of getting married to Susan and being father to these beautiful 2 little boys. Things seemed to be just kind of moving along. Everything was exciting, new, and out of nowhere, Susan and I were moving in together in this apartment in Napa. And Susan's ex-husband runs up to me, and it was nighttime. I was getting some things out of a little pickup truck I was driving, and he comes out of nowhere. Susan's ex-husband comes out of nowhere and shoots me twice and misses my head by about an inch. The bullet goes right through the rearview mirror while I was getting out of this truck in the parking lot of our apartment. You know, I was so distracted with all the good things going on, getting married, and all these things that didn't seem to overfill my glass. But one thing that was happening for sure is these events and these traumatic events that have happened over my life continued to build up. As a kid, I saw a lot of things. You know, my father would get in fights with people on the streets of Miami. He would pull guns out on people. I mean, these were kind of became normal things for me in my childhood. And with that being said, those things I believe would continue to stack and continue to stack. So one day I wake up and I'm literally dizzy. And that feeling I felt in New York City came back up. And this was probably 3-4 years after we got married. And I remember that all of a sudden it was as if somebody was electrocuting my brain. My brain was constantly would feel tingly. My palms would sweat. My heart would start racing. And I constantly feel like if I was going to have a heart attack. That was constant. There was a time where I found myself going into the emergency room sometimes twice in a week just because I thought something was that awfully wrong. Doctors would diagnose, they would do EKGs, they would do all kinds of CAT scans, things like that, and nothing would, there was no diagnosis. So I would continue to research and try to figure out, and this is before the internet, so to get information, it was really only the doctor that you were seeing that could help you. And with that being said, I just struggling getting answers. I just wanted answers. So after many visits to the ER, after many visits to MDs, I was lucky enough to run into a doctor, a Kaiser doctor, who had a degree in psychology. And this doctor asked me a handful of questions. He asked me about my life. He asked me how many kids I had. At this point, I was already either 3 or 4 kids. We have a total of 4 kids. He asked me if I've had previous trauma, how I grew up, where was I living at the time. I remember I was living at my mother-in-law's house with a house full of kids. And he diagnosed me on the spot as you're suffering from panic attacks and anxiety attacks. That was basically his diagnosis, and he knew that this was real. He suggested I go and get group therapy to start talking to other people about it. One thing that I learned in group therapy is that I wasn't alone and that this was happening to a lot of people. So this is in the early 90s, very early 90s. And one of the nice things in going to therapy was that they would start giving us breathing techniques. So we would start breathing from our abdomen in a way that we could slow our heart rate down and bring some of that, how can I say this? It would round out the edges of the anxiety. Instead of the anxiety being so poignant and so traumatic, the breathing would allow me to round out the edges. So I did that for a while, but still the anxiety would persist. And one thing that I found myself is everybody wanted me to get on meds, and I had anxiety about taking medicines. That would give me a panic attack, just the thought of taking medicines. But after Susan did a lot of research, we found a wonderful psychiatrist in Santa Elena, California, and he prescribed Paxil. Try taking the 30 milligrams of Paxil once a day, and I will tell you that it's been almost 25 years. I still take this one pill every single day, and it's changed my life for the better. Now, I'll tell you, I'm the anti-medicines. I rather do anything naturally if I can start that way. But in this case, I knew I needed something more than homeopathic, because I couldn't even get off the couch to go to work. And Susan knew that was not a way that I wanted to live, and she really rallied around helping me get to somebody. I don't know that I would have done that on my own if I didn't have that type of support. Now, the one thing that I want to say is, remember, we are all individuals. Because something works for me doesn't mean it works for you. In addition to an amazing psychiatrist that I have till this day, I also have two amazing therapists that I talk to from time to time. I actually have a third therapist who happens to be one of my best and dearest friends. And if I'm stuck or don't know who to call for something, he would tell me. But I believe many of us can benefit from leaning into our issues with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorders, that may be leading you into panic attacks, anxiety attacks, or things that are debilitating enough that may keep you from doing the things that you really love doing. There are times that I consider getting off the Paxil. I've even talked to doctors at the True North Health Center in Santa Rosa, California, and even they suggest that if I don't have side effects from the drugs, that I really think, long and hard before getting off of the drug, because it's worked really well for me. So that's just for me. One thing that has really been a game changer for me is also the way that I eat. Removing caffeine, chocolate, things like that out of my system that are they are stimulants that really, really work on my dopamine. They have a real effect on the way that I feel after days of consuming them. So, as a lot of you know, I'm living SOS C-free. SOS stands for sugar, oil, and salt. C, caffeine. I haven't taken any caffeine in about 4 months now. And I'll tell you, it's really helped my mood stabilize in a way that I don't know that medicine could. So when people say, you've heard people say food is medicine, I am a proponent and will live for the rest of my life preaching that food is medicine. What we put in our mouths has a total and absolute connection to the outcome, So a lot of things have changed for me. My inflammation, the way that I feel, the pain. I had chronic back pain. My back pain is down to, from a 10, is down to a 1 or a 2 on a bad day. Joints, because they're not so inflamed, I'm able to go to the gym and do workouts that I haven't done in a lot of years. I'm 56 years old. So with being 56 years old and the pain that I had in my joints, I was not able to even do, 10 push-ups. Now I'm 25. I can probably pull 30 push-ups if I wanted to. I'm going to start pull-ups pretty soon as I continue to increase my weight. So I just want to brag about that for a second, only because if I can encourage you to change what you're eating for mental clarity, it's worth it. So mental clarity is another thing that I wanted to touch on. The mental clarity I have now, because I'm eating SOS C-free, is unlike anything I felt since I was in elementary school. We grew up in an island, Puerto Rico, and in Puerto Rico, a lot of what you eat is processed and in a box, because fresh produce doesn't get there the way that we have here in California and throughout a lot of the states in the United States. So again, consider what you eat as something that may be affecting you mentally if you're having issues. The other thing that I find is focus. Focus and how I'm able to stay on task is unlike before. I've always been sort of a self-diagnosed what do you call hyperattention deficit disorder? I don't think I was ever a hyperattention deficit disorder. I think I was just a product of my consumption and what I consumed. Food was my addiction, and that was the drug of choice for me. Since I've been off of that, the thing that has also dramatically changed for me is sleep. I go to bed 8:30, 9 o'clock at the latest. I'm asleep within 5 minutes, and I don't get up till probably 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'm getting 8 or 9 hours of an evening, a night of sleep without any interruptions. The only thing that wakes me up is one of my barking dogs. Many people, as you know, suffer from panic attacks. It's not as taboo now as it used to be, so people talk about it and consider that that is something that you can hang your hat on. You can openly talk to somebody about anxiety attacks, and you're not going to be judged the way I was judged back in the day when you talked to somebody about that. You knew somebody thought you were crazy when you said you had panic attacks or anxiety attacks. So be as open as possible is the only way you're going to help yourself, is by talking about this. The other thing that I like to say, people talk about anything that hurts them, just constantly. If your leg hurts, your ankle hurts, but if your mind is in trouble and if you're suffering, for some reason people don't want to talk about that. Consider that your mind is part of your body, and then talking about it is what sets you free. And also, I really want you to consider that you talking about it, you're helping your kids and your kids' kids be able to talk about it if they ever find themselves in the situation. A lot of people suffer from this. Now, I want to cover 3 tangible things you can do to help yourself if you suffer from anxiety and or panic attacks. And these are things that worked for me. So the first thing is caffeine. Chocolate is right in there with caffeine, but any stimulant like that, any type of caffeine, if you can get that out of your system, I would highly encourage you to do that. One thing is, for me to stop drinking caffeine, there are times that vegetable juices would help me do that, primarily carrot juice. So try carrot juice if you need help getting off of caffeinated drinks, soft drinks, anything like that. The beta carotene will make you feel good, and you're going to get a boost of micronutrients. And for some reason, for me, it gives me this feeling of euphoria, like, oh my God, I just got a jolt of energy. I really ask you to consider that one. Step 2, talk to somebody. Talk to somebody you know, who you trust and you feel comfortable with. But try to get to a psychologist, psychiatrist that has experience with anxiety. Don't think for a minute that you have to burden this alone. You really don't. We don't live in a third world country, fortunately for us, where you have to just suffer through this. These people do have tools in their tool bag to help you through this. So try to get to somebody as soon as possible. One of my biggest mistakes is that I suffered with this for years before I really got to a place where something could really help. So don't wait that long. I bet you, for me, from that time of that first episode in New York City to the time where I finally met Dr. Thuma, I bet you it was close to 10 years. And there were some rough times. I mean, there were times that I pull over on the side of the highway and go to the truck scales and ask the CHP if I can just lay down on their couch, because I felt my brain on fire. So, and the police were nice enough to understand that that was probably being smart, that I wasn't continuing to stay on the road, because while I was on the road, I felt like things were spinning, and it can get worse. I mean, panic attacks can get really, really debilitating. So I really encourage you to address them. Step 3. be mindful as to what you eat. Salt, sugars, synthetic oils, those things all have an effect on us. So I would really ask you to consider what you're eating. I always love mentioning Dr. Joel Fuhrman's book, Eat to Live, and he's got a newer one called Eat for Life. It'll help balance you. You might miss the salt, you might miss the sugars, you might go through withdrawals, but what it will do for you as far as mental health, I think could be significant. I'd give it a shot. It shouldn't weigh on you to at least give that a try. Another book that you can look into that I really enjoyed is by Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. Lyle, is The Pleasure Trap. How do you start eating nutrient-dense foods rather than calorie-dense foods? And that book has been really helpful. I always pitch it because it really changed the game for me in my relationship with mental health. And the last thing, I hope today's episode was helpful to you and maybe relatable. I can't do this alone, so there are I've used a lot of resources out there, and I would highly encourage you to start with your doctor, go online, start looking at YouTube podcasts and what people say about their experience with panic attacks and anxiety. Always get a second opinion. I'm a real big fan of second opinions. Be your best advocate. Don't give up on yourself. This is your well-being and your life. We're talking about it, and you're totally, totally worth it. Lastly, I'll say it one last time because I'm a shameless promoter. Hit the subscribe button if you want to be alerted to future events. Hit the little bell. Give us a like, and we'll keep bringing in content. One of the next episodes, I have a triathlete who's going to be on the show, and I can't wait to introduce you to him. And this should happen in the next 3 weeks because he has a marathon that he's doing in a couple of weeks. And then Dr. Goldhammer from the True North Health Center, who is the founder of the True North Health Center and co-author of The Pleasure Trap, will be on the show, and I'll be announcing that date very shortly. Today's special message, I want to read it to you because I don't want to leave a word out. Life is a lonely let me start over. Life is a lonely journey. With the help of others, we can traverse its trails with much more ease. Remember to put on your oxygen mask first. You're much more useful to others when you take care of yourself first. So take care of yourself.